Hi, welcome to Eric's Movie Corner. I'm Eric, and I'm here to talk about movies. Let's do it. Today, I am going to be talking about a brand new movie currently in theaters called The Night House. The Night House is directed by David Bruckner. David Bruckner also directed a movie called The Ritual, which is available on Netflix. I really loved that movie and highly recommend you go see it if you haven't already. And that's what kind of caught my attention on this movie here. Also, it stars Rebecca Hall, who is a fantastic actress. If you have not seen her in anything, you probably have, you just don't know her name. But if you haven't seen her in anything, I would recommend seeking out some of her work because she is a great actress. She was in a movie called Christine. No, not the Stephen King adaptation, but a movie about a real-life story. It was inspired by a true story, one of those, but this actually did happen. There was a news anchor who had mental health issues and ended up committing suicide on the air back in the 70s. So, that is a movie I would recommend to see her acting prowess in. Also, just as a trigger warning, suicide is a theme of the movie I'm about to review, so if you're uncomfortable listening to me talk about that, I would recommend you skedaddle, because it's kind of impossible to talk about the movie without hitting on that subject. Rebecca Hall is mainly the star of this movie. There's also Sarah Goldberg also stars in this movie as possibly the best friend in the world, Claire, who is really something else, goes above and beyond for her friend, played by Rebecca Hall. So this movie is about a woman who's dealing with the death of her husband by suicide, and she's trying to cope with the whole deal. And part of her coping, she's trying to clean up her house. She's doing things like taking all the pictures of him and putting them away so that she doesn't have to look at them anymore because she can't deal with it right now. And she starts to run across some things of his that indicate that he was up to some stuff that she was unaware of. That's as far as I'm going to go with the plot for now, because I'm going to throw up a spoiler flag in a little bit so we can really dig into this movie quite a bit. But without getting into plot details, I can tell you that if you are looking for a scare-a-minute action ride, this is not the movie for you. This movie is very slow and very deliberate, and it does pick up towards the second half of the movie. However, this is not your jump scare kind of movie. There's a jump scare that actually got me in this movie, but it's not something that's going on throughout the movie. During the first 30 minutes of this movie, Rebecca Hall puts on a phenomenal performance. Most of it when she's in rooms by herself. Her character is dealing with the tragedy of her husband's suicide, and she brings forth a plethora of emotions in this character without even speaking a word. The sadness, the despair, the anger, all just right there on her face for you to observe. She is a great actress, and she is great in this movie. Pretty much carries the whole thing. I will also say that if you're the kind of person that needs to have everything wrapped up for you in a movie with a nice little bow on it, this might not be for you. The ending of this movie is pretty ambiguous, and even the director, David Bruckner, has said that really the interpretation of this movie is up to the viewer. It could be interpreted any number of ways, none of which is wrong. It all depends on what you, as the viewer, bring to the movie. So, if you don't need a jump scare a minute, and you appreciate great acting, and you're okay with ambivalent endings, then I would really recommend you go see this movie, because I enjoyed it quite a bit. That being said, I am going to throw up the spoiler flag at this point so I can dig into some of the plot details and themes of the movie. If you're at all interested in watching this movie, bail now and don't listen to the rest of this, because you don't want to be spoiled when you watch this movie. Just take my word on that. So go watch the movie if you're interested and come back and listen to the rest of this. And now I'm going to get into the details of the plot and what I thought. Along the way during this movie, we find out that Beth, who is Rebecca Hall's character, actually technically died when she was younger. Her heart stopped for 4 minutes after a car accident. And during her near-death experience, she saw nothing. A lot of people describe the light at the end of the tunnel. She says it was just tunnel and that there's nothing. The only person she ever told this was her husband. Her husband left a note when he killed himself. Her husband left a note when he committed suicide saying, "You were right. There is nothing. You are safe now." This movie gets a little weird in that apparently the husband was using some type of magic, some type of occult rituals, and she's digging into that and finds pictures of another woman on his phone and starts playing detective. And it all turns out that when Beth died previously, the nothingness that she saw is actually some kind of supernatural entity, I suppose. It gets a little sticky here because clearly there's an entity of some sort because she interacts with it in this movie. I don't know if it's death or a demon or some other sort of entity. However, it definitely exists because it's part of the movie. It's the character in this movie. And what's been going on this whole time is that this entity was whispering into her husband's ear to bring her to him, to kill her so that he could have her back from when she died before. So it's a little Final Destination in that regard, in that if you're meant to die, you're meant to die, and there's no escaping it. However, the husband was using all these occult rituals to try and confuse this entity into not taking his wife, and eventually it got to the point where he started, big spoiler, I already warned you to skedaddle, he actually started murdering other women that looked like her to try and fool this entity into thinking that he had done what the entity wanted him to do. And eventually it got to the point where he couldn't resist the urges that the entity was putting into his head to murder his wife anymore. And that's when he killed himself because he'd rather die himself than kill his wife. A little grim, yeah. And at the end of this movie, you have an interaction between Beth, Rebecca Hall's character, and this entity. And the entity is trying to cajole her into also committing suicide so it can have her back. And there's this, what I thought was a great scene at the end of the movie, where she is trying to resist the urge that this entity is putting into her head to commit suicide. And meanwhile, she's kind of like in this trance, kind of in another world, where in reality she's sitting in the same boat that her husband committed suicide in with the same gun. And her friend, Claire, that I was talking about earlier, actually is calling for her, had come over to the house to check on her, is calling for her, and actually dives into the lake to swim out to her and stop her from killing herself. I told you she was the best friend in the world. And it's really interesting because although this entity is clearly a being and a character in this movie, for me, what I got out of this scene, it was really powerful for me because I took it as a metaphor for depression, which is something that I have struggled with in my life. And depression is the one that's trying to put the thoughts in her head and trying to cajole her into committing suicide. And at the end of the movie, when she gets back on the dock with her friend and her neighbor, she's staring back out at the boat, and there's this like shadowy silhouette in the boat that apparently only she can see. And her neighbor says, "There's nothing there." And she says, "Yes, I know." So the fact that that shadow is still there and that she can still see it and nobody else can, it's, for me, the meaning I got out of it is that it's a representation of depression and how even when you have your victories over it, it's still something that's out there and that you're going to have to deal with again and struggle with going forward pretty much for the rest of your life. It really hit me pretty hard because of Rebecca Hall's incredible performance. And really, the only other movie I can think off the top of my head that was more powerful for me in regards to exploring depression was the Lars von Trier movie Melancholia, which is a masterpiece in its own right. But this really hit me where I live as far as that goes. So maybe I'm rating this movie on a curve a little higher because of my personal association to what I felt were some of the themes in it. Be that as it may, it's undeniable that Rebecca Hall puts forth a hell of a performance in this movie, so I would recommend seeing it just for that. Thank you for listening to me talk about The Night House. If you've seen the movie, let me know in the comments below if you think my interpretation of some of those things are correct, or if you disagree with me, I'd like to know what your take is. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, and if you want to come back and see more of what I post, hit the subscribe and notification. That way you always know what's coming. So thanks for stopping by Eric's Movie Corner. Come back next time.